Rocking and rolling this morning. All right. Well, welcome everyone. It's been an interesting week to say the least. I think everybody's weather has been up and down and kind of all over the place in this beautiful springtime. And so thank you for coming, and hope you enjoy your beautiful warmth today. Cindy was sharing how nice and warm it is for you guys today, and it'll be a beautiful springtime day. So I wanted to start with, as we've been looking at skills lists and really thinking about disciplinary approaches and how to stay really focused on those disciplinary understandings through product selection, as we spoke a little bit about that last week. I wanted to share some ideas about skills lists with you, kind of as our intro, and then Barb's gonna take over for a few minutes and share some curriculum maps and some other information and resources that hopefully you'll find really helpful and beneficial. So if you go to, I'm going to start sharing my screen on the syllabus. You'll see two links up here, right here by the hello. The first one is the default skills list and definitions. So Lisa mentioned this in the teaching channel thread, and I wanted to just give you a quick link to that because it's not as easy to find within the course content. It's not under that resources tab when you first click on your section. I wanted to give you that as a link. I use that a lot when I'm thinking about what the different layers of thinking are as I'm building my skills list to support my task. But there's a really interesting one here from Battelle. And when you click on that link, it'll take you to the scientific literacy skill list. And so it shows you a lot of possible skills and definitions that for a science teacher could really help them think about the different layers of thinking to build towards their task. And so this is just a resource to help you consider customizing your skills list. I wanted to start off with a resource share. So as you're taking a look at that, hopefully you're finding that useful. The default skills list and definitions, when you click on that, it should open up and you'll see some different possible skills that would take place during your pre-reading steps, your active reading, post-reading, transition to writing, some different ways of thinking about that as far as bridging conversation and speaking and active listening. And I find the definitions are really helpful because often in core tools when I'm designing, there won't be a definition there and I'm not sure how I want to frame it. And so this really helps me think of the different sequence that I need to build as I go across it. And here are some other different layers to the writing process that you might want to consider using. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Barb, and I'm going to walk us through some other resources that at this stage in your design process, hopefully you'll find really useful.
One of the things we were talking about last week and in the chat, I'm hoping I am sharing, was this idea of a short module. Many of us began with LDC when we had our first experiences on pencil and paper were that our modules really became very, very large, almost unwieldy to the point where it's like, hey, maybe I could do this once or twice a year. And one of the things we just wanted to say to you folks is, as you're thinking about this, there's a place, LDC is really writing in response to reading, right? And there's different kinds of writing that I might want to do. So to me, it's not that we're encouraging short modules over long ones or specific rules down to in a really granular way. It's to what we'd like to do is just have you think a little bit about the role of LDC in your overall curriculum. And so one of the things we see folks do is sequence shorter and longer modules for different purposes within curriculum apps. So I wanted to reinforce, and I'll just share this slide with you, that a graphic that I like to think about a lot is that whenever I want to have a deep reading and writing response, is a place where I might use an LDC module. It might be shorter or longer depending on my purpose, but really it's about that process. So within a year, I might use a short module at the beginning of a unit before we read a novel, for example, or to examine RFPs and perhaps write an analysis of their features. I might use, at the end of that unit, I might use a module in place of a unit the next time through. It's really about how do I want to sequence the learning for students to go deeper. One of the things that I like to think about is this idea of thinking about the modules within a larger curriculum map. We have a number of these we can share with you, but one of my favorites, because we've talked a little bit about products, is this idea of a curriculum map with products. So I'm thinking about what LDC might help me accomplish across quarters. And so when I think about that, I might use modules to teach specific standards and a specific kind of thinking, of course, throughout the quarters. And then when I look at the different subjects, the unifying element is the standards, perhaps the standards focus and the thinking focus. And I'm going to vary the academic product, perhaps. One, the academic product is aligned to the kind of thinking work I want students to do. But when I think about mapping it out that way, I'm making sure that students have the opportunity to do different kinds of products that they might need. One of the things that came up last week was this idea of an infographic. In their comments in the chat this week about that, the end product of an infographic might not look like a lot of writing, but it is the result of a lot of research, writing, and thinking. And so some of the work products I'm analyzing along the way are the notes, the research, all of those kinds of things. The final product certainly looks different than an essay, but it did require great rigor, great thinking, and skill development. So wanted to just show you just a couple of these resources for your thinking caps. The thing that we put on the syllabus is a link to the product focus map and also this draft disciplinary products for short modules. I get a little nervous sometimes when folks ask for lists. But we know that lists are also helpful. So Kimba's put this together, and she'll talk about it in just a moment, with a couple resources that, again, as folks are thinking about a shorter module or a longer module, it makes sense to me if I'm using a longer module for a specific purpose that I can see perhaps a research paper or a longer product, but how do I keep the rigor that I want in a short module? So what we've done here is just listed a few suggestions to think about and pull them from Barry Olson's work. But really, again, it is that right fit between what your purpose is, the standards, the texts. Certainly if I'm giving kids more to read about and they're pulling more extensive notes, then that writing piece is probably longer. So just a few things for you here to think about and hopefully add to your bank of resources. Kimba, do you have more to add? Did I hit what we talked about? I'll open it up to the group.
Yeah, I think so. I just want to point out one thing, that a lot of these different products that you'll find on this list are just drawn from some of the variations on Dr. Olson's list, as far as like an essay of definition, a refutation, argument, things like that. And so you can still use a lot of that thinking that she has compiled as far as the rhetorical purpose and the major traits of these types of writing, and really thinking about which ones maybe take a smaller bite of the content or you can dig into in a different way in order to fit a shorter time period, such as a 1 or 2 week module. And so hopefully this list will be useful.
Kimba, I think the other thing we talked about, and I just I realized that I missed it, is we have two other links here for you. One is to a short module collection, which we're going to update. So it's nice to see examples of how other folks are just having a tight module that probably has a compacted writing process. And then the other thing that we produce periodically, it's one of my favorite things, is here's a spreadsheet of, as of February, all of the rated tasks in our collection, and it's sortable. And when you look at that and you're thinking about, because we got so many questions about folks thinking about products deeply, column L is writing products. So you can take a look at the relationship. I think it just cleans it out for you, where you can look at the relationship between the task, the product, the standards in a nice way. So I hope this might be just a good resource for your coaching.
So that's kind of where we want to take your thinking for our turn-in talk today. Is when you look at these resources, what are your thoughts? Do they feel like they could be useful? How might you approach using them? And I feel like we did a really quick presentation of a number of really more detailed resources, and so we want to give you a second to look at a couple of those links, be it the Battelle scientific literacy skills list, even the default skills list and definitions, that product focused curriculum map, really thinking about the product discussion that we had last week and how to address that and support all of you even further. And also this disciplinary products possible list for things to consider for short modules. And so if you notice on the syllabus, our turn-in talk topic today is, what are your takeaways or reactions to the resources that we just shared? How does determining the product or where the product fits in the year impact your skills list? So when you're thinking about that product focused curriculum map, with where it occurs in the year, does that impact how you view your skills list? What's the relationship between these resources and kind of where our content work is right now? And so I'm going to go ahead and post those questions in the chat, and we'll partner you up with someone. And so let's see, Barb, if I could get you to stop sharing your screen for just a minute, and I'll see
Absolutely.
everybody, and we'll partner folks up. Now, Dana and Kim are sharing a computer today. So rather than having you try to chat with someone, maybe I'll have you two kind of chat together, and then you can talk to us about it, and you'll have like a true shoulder-to-shoulder turn-in talk right now, because it might make the conversation a little more difficult for a private chat. But I'll try to remember that as I'm assigning people.
That's probably true of Mike and Kate also.
Yeah,
correct?
so I think so. So maybe we'll have Mike and Kate go ahead and be partners today in chat, and we'll have Dana and Kim. And then let's go ahead and do, let's see, how about Liz and Renee? We'll do Stacy and Sheena, Jeanette and Wayne, Lisa and Kelly Stidham, Amy and Jamie, Cindy and Jackie, and let's see, Kelly and Teresa. Did I get everybody? I'm trying to remember who's all partners with each other. Did I miss anyone?
I think we're good.
All right. Go ahead and start your chat with your partner. And let me know if you have any questions. We'll chat for just a couple minutes, and then we'll share out. So as we start hearing from the groups, I actually want to just vocalize the question that Renee just asked in the chat. And that was that the lists are just starting points or suggestions. And definitely, I think that's something that we really want to stress, is that it's not exhaustive. It's definitely not done with a great deal of vetting and thought as to what are the perfect, right, like short module kind of products. It was just thinking about which seem to capture different levels of thinking work that might work well with a short module. And so it's 100% just a starting point, suggestions to start those kind of conversations. So love to hear from the groups. Oh, did I freeze? Hopefully okay, good. So what are some of your reactions to these resources? Some thoughts, how much you use them? What do you notice about them? How does it fit into your learning?
We talked a little bit about teachers feeling uncertain about things, and if they're doing things correctly or this is the right thing. So I think a list like that lets them know, yeah, you're on the right path. And it, just like Renee was saying, it is a starting place for conversations, because I may not, do exactly what's on that list, or I might pull one and it be what I want. But I might go completely different and change it up a little bit too. But at least I know I'm on the right path. And I told Wayne that I was also included in that uncertainty piece this week. This professional learning kicked my tail just a little bit this week. It really stretched my thinking, because I had always just used what was there, So I think that is a big piece of what these resources can do, is make them really think about, what are your skills? What really do you want the kids to do?
Excellent.
Jeanette, I love what you just said. And I just want to say again, as one of the oldest living Confederate widows of LDC, what sometimes happens is that I hear all over the country these rules of how to do LDC that I have never heard of. I'm like, where did that come from? And one of you put in your chat about the LDC police. So one of the things I want to do sometimes, I try to strike this balance in productive struggle with people. I don't want their hair on fire, that they can't think, but I want to push thinking. And I love that you said this kicked your tail this week, and you're still smiling. What I want to do is, Kim and I wrestled with this. We thought that based on what you were talking about, that a list might be useful, but we didn't want it to be viewed as exhaustive. So I produce I'll produce a resource with a caveat, but then I keep stressing, what is the thinking work you want students to do, and what is the best way to do that? What is the intent of the standard? What is your purpose? Where is this situated in the bigger picture? That we keep pushing this, being a thoughtful practitioner, because in the long run, it's not really about LDC. It's, continuing just to get better at our teaching. So I just wanted to give a benediction on what you just said, because I think it's so important that but again, if you have that conversation but never give people anything, sometimes they get anxious, I think. So I think it's a balance.
Well, and Barb, just to sort of piggyback on that, so sometimes I go into it thinking more about what I want kids to come out with instead of what thinking I want them to do. And maybe I'm also limiting it because I've got in my mind, I want this in this folder at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. So when I see a list like that, at least it helps me to say, oh, I'd never thought about that. And it takes you in maybe a different direction.
I think too, there's nothing wrong with back mapping from a product, at all, I think that's one lens on it. And I think a lot about what inputs and what outputs am I going for? What am I reading inputs? How are they going to wrestle with that? And then what's, the output?
I really appreciate, Barb, what you're saying about the thinking and the thinking work we want students to do and what skills are needed to do that. Because I think my kind of rub with the skills list has been that I've seen so often people focused on, or not the skills list, but like the product list, rather. I've seen so often people focused on just a product and, formulaic response to what that product looks like. And then the thinking work is all lost for students. And so these conversations are good for me to remind me of the balance, because I tend to go the opposite direction. Like, wait, by requiring certain products, we stifled thinking and we gave formulas and then we never got anything authentic. So hearing the conversations about thoughtfulness, the thinking we want students to do, and you know, that we need to have balance is really helping me.
I appreciate that too, Renee. And I think it's hard for me because I have never, in my personal classroom practice, I was never product driven, because as a math teacher, we don't produce products and then score students based on a product usually. We usually think about, like, show me your thinking, however way you want to do it, and then that's what we'll talk about. So I work a lot with arts and humanities teachers and science teachers in LDC and some social studies. So other than determining, like, is this argumentative or is this explanatory? That's part of the thinking part. But I like this list because I otherwise kind of devalue naming the product, just in my own bias. Like, you tell me, you show me how you want to show me your thinking, and that will be fine. You know what I mean by that? And so I think that I haven't always been intentional about, are there skills in producing that product that I've been not giving the students opportunities to get explicit feedback on. Because
I think for me,
on the other hand, I do think it is a good way to give students choice, like multiple, you know, if I don't tell you you have to do an infographic and I say, what's the best way for you to show me your thinking, then that's another opportunity.
I think too that the link between product and the reading process, also the writing process and the reading process. If I'm going to produce a brochure, I need to, you know, skim it, not only read for content, but I'm probably going to need to read and analyze how other authors are putting together brochures or infographics, or I'm going to look at other RFPs when I create an RFP. So there's just a certain link, there's an alignment between the kinds of reading I'm doing, you know, to see how other authors do that. I think too, that's implied in all of this.
See, I even like to think of what Barb's talking. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the products list also helps us because the short modules came out, but we didn't have a lot of guidance on products. And so, you know, we saw people saying, well, you could do a short answer or you could do an extended response, and it's kind of sacrificing the writing. And so I think the products list really helps us, you know, sort of see that writing product is still very important, even on the short modules.
Yeah, and having a product that gives the right amount of space to really apply and demonstrate the thinking work that they've been doing is something I like to consider a lot. So really fantastic conversation. We have a number of tasks to look at today, and so I want to just kind of transition us out of this. If there are other insights and things that you want to capture, please continue the conversation in the chat. We do have folks who are sharing today, and we're just going to go in the order that people are signed up on the task sharing sheet. And so I believe, Kelly Stidham, we're starting with you today. Would you like to go ahead and share your screen, and we'll read through your task and start a discussion. I can't tell. I don't see people's videos moving much.
You seem okay.
Okay. I always worry when I can't see the videos moving much, if I'm frozen or if it's something with just the rate of upload. So Kelly, do you remember how to share your screen to share your task?
And Kelly's muted right now.
Yeah. So I'm not.
Sorry, I thought I
Oh,
I
now
don't
you're
think
muted.
it's letting me.
Okay. So if you go to the bottom and you hit share screen, you then choose which screen you want, but there's a second button you have to hit where it says like start now or share now. It's a little blue button in the right corner.
I did that, but I think now it's not frozen anymore.
There
Is it
it goes.
working?
There it goes.
Ooh, okay.
Now we have it.
So I have never written a math module before, even though that's my home discipline, I guess you would call it. And I thought, if I'm going to figure this out, then this is the crew that is going to help me do it. So that's what I tried to do in this task. And it's an 8th grade task. So basically, it says, after reading an article on the measures of cancer rates in Appalachia and researching the data uses its evidence, write a response to the journal in which you argue if the conclusions of the text are reasonable based on your model, support your position with evidence from the text. I don't think that's terribly clear without seeing the text, but there's an article, it cites what data source it uses, and then the author makes a prediction of what they think the cancer rates will be in 10 years based on using a linear model of the data. But there are lots of different models that you could have used to interpret that would give you very different conclusions. So it's pretty open. And then the standards were integrate quantitative or technical information expressed in words into text with a version of that information expressed visually. So this text has a graph, a table of the data, and then also an explanation in text. And there's some assumptions that they make in the narrative that isn't necessarily clear in the data part of the text. Write an argument. So I was, in the math standards, I was kind of torn because I used math practice 4, which is creating a model, but now I'm thinking that it really needs to be math practice 3, which is critiquing the reasoning of others. I think that's probably more appropriate. And then it's really tied to the 8th grade standard using functions to model relationships. So all the students' arguments would be based on which family of functions they use to model and how that shows the different conclusions that might be drawn from the same set of data. The skills ladder was really interesting. For me, I did borrow some things from the science data analysis, although I think they probably could be tweaked a little bit. And really, I'm just ready for your thoughts.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Will you scroll back up towards the standards and the task? And what are people's reactions? I really like what you said about which math standard you think is a better fit. What are other people's reactions to that?
Yeah, I do think that's a good change, and I also love the reading standard there as well.
Yeah, and I was left when I was reading it about just wondering, when looking at that reading standard, thinking about within a text itself, when you have the data table as well as the words, to support it, the narrative or whatever. And I was wondering, would the text have them both in it, or would they be looking at two different things? And so, Kelly, hearing you describe the text was really helpful because I found it so difficult to know how to approach feedback without knowing what the text contained, right? One of the things that I do have a question about is possibly adding additional text that students could use to support why different linear equations or different I'm not sure if I'm going to use the right terminology here, and I apologize for that.
That's okay.
But different formulas would produce different results, right? To help support their perspective or stance within the written product, right? I know I'm not articulating myself very well here, but I'm wondering if other people are thinking about that as well. Would just the data and their own knowledge of math be enough, or could they have text about the different formulas that could support some of their processes as well as conclusions? I don't know. What do other people think?
So I kind of think if you're asking them to model, to come up with their own model basically, or figure out with their model, was the text reasonable based on the model. It's almost like they're showing their work of how they figured it out, rather than so they're looking at a conclusion from the text, and then their model would have to support that. So I don't know that another text would help, because you're really focusing in on, this is the conclusions that were drawn. These are the conclusions that were drawn, and the model of your math work should support that. Does it or not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think maybe let me say what I was thinking about that kind of issue, and then you give me more feedback in the time that we have. But so by model, I should have defined that as a mathematical model. So students have been studying using functions to model data sets since 6th grade, and this was an 8th grade task. So a model in mathematics is it's a representation of a relationship that's analogous to the data set. So it's it's similar to in science, but in math we would probably say things like, I've taken something I've seen in the real world and I've either said, here's a geometric representation or a equation or a table or a graph. Those are all mathematical models. And so I didn't think that the kids would need an extra text about the different functions, because that's really what they would have been studying, assumably quite a long time, for several years in middle school.
Kelly, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Sorry, the audio here is a little funky, so you might have already said this. If so, I apologize.
I can just come over there. I'm like 50 feet away.
I'm just wondering if you think it needs to be explicit in the task to create the model, the model. Sorry, not the module. The creating a model is, embedded in it, and I just didn't know if it would be helpful to explicitly state that, create a model and write a response to the journal, blah, 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 blah. I don't know if that helps or if that's redundant and would be, is just part of it.
Yeah, I guess because I think maybe so. I think I need your help to get out of my math brain a little bit and make it more clear for everyone. But so mathematical modeling is like the process we always use to address real world data, always. So I didn't really think of them creating a model as like a subproduct, but modeling is like, it's the 4th process standard. It's really a process. It's not like, yeah, but I see what you mean.
Yeah. But Kelly, don't you think that math model, that their model is going to be a text? It's just not going to be one that you have selected. So that is their text, and it is something that they're creating. So I agree with Kate. I think it needs to be in there.
Okay. Well, and it came up in the chat in a couple of places, just clarifying what your intention is around model and who's creating it, either in the overview or in the task itself. It sounds like the model, the way you describe it, is the thinking work to then be able to do the critique of the article. And so on that product list that was shared today, there is an article critique in which which might be the right product for you here, and really align with that Math Practice Standard 3 in the way that you worded it. And then that way you can provide the skills to help them know how to write an effective critique and use their model as evidence to support why they feel the way they do about the original article's stance, right? So thank you so much. We got to move on to the next one. Please, you guys, feel free to go into the collection and leave additional comments and feedback for Kelly. It sounds like she'd really appreciate hearing feedback. I've heard you say a couple times to get out of your math brain or want to bounce ideas off of folks. And so this is a great cohort to do that with. So thank you so much, Kelly. Appreciate that. we're going to go ahead and jump to our next person. Our next person today is going to be Stacy. We'll be looking at Stacy's task. So one thing that I want you to think about is one of the things that was really helpful with getting our heads around Kelly's task and filling in some of those blanks was having to really talk about her goals, right? What were the goals that she had for her students? What were the thinking goals she wanted them to be able to work through to really help us understand how to target our feedback for her. And so a really great place to start when you're working with teachers, and these were some of the questions that came up in the teaching channel this week as well, is really about, what do you want the task to accomplish with your students every time that you're writing it, right? Being able to articulate that and have that be that driving point when you're going through and checking it and seeing if it's accomplishing what you're hoping it will accomplish. What should your students be able to do as a result? That was one of the questions that Wayne posted in the chat. Or is this going to help them reach a larger goal, right? That will help them in future thinking across the content. And so think about those things and how that can guide your feedback process and even your own design thinking process. So Stacy, go ahead and share your screen. Remember there's those 2 steps. You'll hit that share screen at the bottom. There we go. And walk us through your task, Stacy.
Okay. Well, let me begin by saying I tried to do something that pushed me a little bit out of my comfort zone. I have an ELA background, but I have done a lot of work with different content teachers around module development, and seemed to be that the health teachers struggled the most in trying to create modules, to implement modules, to access modules. So I decided to do a module around a health standard, and based on something that I know a health teacher does, I kind of started with the product in mind. I wanted them, because I know in the class that they weekly read articles from the local newspaper that different health doctors or health community members and stuff are writing. They're doing feature articles weekly around health topics relative to our community. So I wanted to start with the students writing an article so that we're already using that model on a weekly basis and analyzing the structure and such, or the teacher is. So I wanted to use that model, and that's why I decided to have them write an article as the end product. Looking at the task itself, I'm assuming it's showing up. Everybody can see it? I can read it? Okay. How do external factors influence the healthy food choices that people make or don't make? After reading informational text on factors that influence healthy, factors that influence healthy food choices, write a feature article for your local newspaper in which you analyze how geography, convenience, cost, and advertising influence healthy food choices. Support your discussion with evidence from the text. What conclusions can you draw about external factors influencing your community's healthy food choices? And so I decided to add that demand on there just because I know on a weekly basis the teacher is kind of doing a spotlight of factors locally that are impacting the community's health. And looking at the health standard that related to it, I've got it identified, that custom standard. Students will analyze factors, and it specifically mentions geography, convenience, cost, advertising that influence healthy food choices. Then, for the reading standard, it's the one about citing textual evidence, and then the writing standard. I was a little bit unsure if that was correct or not. I didn't know if article would fit there. I didn't know if article really was a technical process. So I'm open to suggestions, thoughts. I'm not completely committed to my standard there that I selected. So if anybody has thoughts on that, I'd certainly welcome it.
All right, thanks, Stacy. So what are people's thoughts? What feedback do you have for Stacy?
Stacy, I would add, just when you were talking about the feature article, at least in some places in Kentucky, feature article, because of our history with portfolios, has a very specific connotation and a very specific history. Granted, you know, when we talk nationally, they probably don't have that understanding, but I'm wondering if it would make it a broader appeal if you just said write an article instead of a feature article, because for a lot of Kentuckians that triggers, it has to look like this, it has to have to, like, it's a very artificial kind of construct that a lot of new teachers don't have that construct, but a lot of the more experienced teachers still do. So that might get you more buy-in.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think that I really like what Kate was saying, because I think that's where that phrase, the LDC police, came from, because we were so stuck in the past, especially those of us old enough to have been part of those portfolios, that if it was given a title of a feature article, then it had to look like this. So I think that when we take that feature part off, that we are going to take away that mindset that a lot of people would have, this has a police behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can totally see that.
So I think that's so powerful to talk about the connotative value within the community that this module would hopefully be taught in, right? And how they might react. I want to go back to your original question, Stacy, about the standards, and a couple things that I'm just really kind of sitting with right now is you may want to think about just using the regular writing standard too, as far as for informational explanatory, instead of the writing history or science and technical subjects version, just because maybe it won't feel like it's boxing you in, because really that's the writing that you're doing. So as long as you're using your W2, you're fine, because if they're doing informational explanatory in an article, it falls under that writing genre, and I think you're okay, or excuse me, writing mode. But I do have a question around using Reading Standard 1, just because that's a support standard for every LDC module, because a large piece of it that's built into the template is that support your discussion with evidence from the text. And so that's embedded in every single.
And I could spend, and I just think about the role of advertising for food, my choice, if that's too much.
Agree with one of my and then just focus on it on that as well.
Together, because I think geography and convenience, I can see them. So I do think that it's okay to have choices like that, but I wonder if there's a different way to say like and or choose to, like, and I hate telling kids to choose some, and that could be part of the instructional ladder to get them there, but maybe not have and in there, because it does seem all inclusive.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
All right. So just to be mindful of time, really great points from everybody. I know I missed a couple of them because I got kicked out of the meeting. But we need to go ahead and jump to our next folks that are sharing. Please, again, make sure you leave additional comments for Stacy, ideas that you have to support her in this. And we'll go on to Cindy. While Stacy stops sharing her screen and we transition over to Cindy, there's one place in the content that I kind of want to take us back to, and I'm not sure if anybody has mentioned this yet while I was kicked out or not. But if we go to section 1.6, so selecting complex text from within our courses, and it's how to select a text for an LDC task. And one of the things to consider when you're selecting a text is really about if it's more of after researching or after reading. And when you're thinking about Stacy's and as we go into Cindy's tasks, do you see them aligning more as being an after researching in which students will be exploring multiple texts to gather, select, and synthesize information? Or do you think that they're doing more of an after reading kind of interaction with the text in which students are doing a close reading or analysis of one text or several short passages of text when you're really thinking about what's happening within it? And so that's just another layer to the thinking when we're looking at some of those decision points within a template. So Cindy, go ahead and walk us through. And I just want to preface with that Cindy and Amy have taken a really similar approach. So we're going to look at their kind of tag team, looking at their tasks. And I'll have you kind of talk through that a little bit. Thanks, Cindy.
Okay, like Stacy, I too had a difficult time trying to decide where to start because I haven't been in the classroom for 3 years, and then my last 2 was teaching 3rd grade math. So I was trying to think about, just for myself, learning and growing. And so I met with the ELA teachers to kind of see at the middle school what they felt like a standard that they needed help with, that they felt like that their students needed more practice and maybe they weren't meeting their needs. So then I also collaborated with our high school because we are on the same campus. So that's why Amy Hill and I decided that we wanted some commonality so that when like our 8th graders go into high school, there's some structures that are already in place and routines that would make it a little bit easier transition for them. So we decided to kind of create our models so that our mini modules so that they would mirror each other. And so mine is after reading, should schools have dress codes? Yes or no? Write an analytical paragraph in which you discuss the author's arguments and evaluate which argument is stronger, and then support your position with evidence from the text. And then we're going to use 8A, 8.1, and then writing 8.4 as our focus standards for that. And then with this article, it also, just point out, it is not uniforms, but dress code, so it's a little bit different approach. And basically the yes article talks about more the common sense, the practical reasons in having a dress code, where the no article is more tied to freedom of speech. And so it makes a good tie to our social studies with the freedom of speech connection.
All right. What do people think? I have a focus question for the task. Because this is argumentation and it's looking at discussing the author's arguments and evaluate which argument is stronger. Because you were reading the yes, no, 2 sides, I feel like it could easily be thought of as like the focus of the task is who makes the argument stronger. But I wonder if really the focus of the task, and at this point in the unit, when you're looking at your overview, is what makes an argument strong, right? And when you're looking at your handout. And so I just wonder if it would be beneficial to maybe use some of the criteria of what makes a strong argument from RI 8 within the task itself, as far as the reasoning being sound or evidence is relevant and sufficient, right? That kind of thing. Kind of like some of those points that you have within the, there's a really nice handout if you scroll down through their task a little bit for folks who are looking at this. To really establish what that criteria is for making that determination of why the argument's stronger.
Okay.
Kate, you put a question in the chat. Do you want to ask that again? Not sure.
Yeah, it was just in response to what you were saying, Kim, but about the question of is that are those criteria is the focus of the task itself, creating or identifying those criteria, or are those mini tasks that get you task? And I guess the question really is how long of a module this is going to be. If it's a shorter module, then that becomes the task. If it's a slightly longer module, then I could see how those would be built into getting you to this point. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I wonder too about the clarity part of having some of that language in the task as well. Is they're evaluating which argument is stronger. But if without knowing what that criteria is, could a student interpret it that they just agree with it more? I mean, that obviously if your mini tasks support it, you'd hope they do that. But if we want to be really clear within the task, sometimes having that criteria might be helpful, such as discuss the author's reasoning in their arguments and evaluate which argument uses evidence and reasoning. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to be really specific, but really making it about what is it that makes it stronger, possibly.
Right. So that they'll kind of know what success is going to look like a little better.
Right, exactly. The other thing is you might want to consider, and this was the comment that I was cut out on with Stacy's, is there a different reading standard that might pair really nicely with R8 to help you really identify what that criteria might even be, right? Maybe it's RI2, right? Like the first part's identifying the claim. And so then it's, instead of just discussing the author's argument, it could be in which you discuss the author's claim and evaluate which author does a better job developing his or her claim using, characteristics of strong argument or something. It just gives you a little more meat to work with when you pair the standards, potentially, than just the R1. The other question here too is back to that question we posed right before we started, was the after reading versus after researching. And here it says after reading, and that feels like a really nice fit because you're closely reading those texts, as opposed to in Stacy's where maybe after researching might have been a better fit. So right now we are at time, and we have still the flip side of Cindy's, Amy's to look at, which is done pretty much the same way, and so we might have some slightly different comments around it
to look at.
We have Mike's that we haven't quite had a chance to see yet today. And so I just want to pose to the group really quickly if maybe we can add Mike's to next week. Mike, how would you feel about that if we go ahead and review your task next week, or we could stay on for 5 more minutes and go through Mike's task? Mike, do you have a preference?
I think next week would be better because I think folks might have other appointments that they're waiting on.
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about. So maybe let's go ahead and wrap up, and we can start by looking at Amy's, which is the other side of Cindy's, next week as well. I think it would only take a few minutes, and it gives us some time to really think about comments that we heard today, which would help support both Amy and Cindy as we wrap up with that. Amy, does that feel okay to you?
Yes, that's fine.
Fabulous. All right. Well, thank you so much for your patience. These lightning rounds get a little tough trying to keep on time, but still give people some quality, thoughtful feedback. And so again, make sure you go into the collection and leave comments in their task forum. So let's go ahead and do a really final quick whip around. What's one word that really resonated with you from today, and then we'll sign off. I know people have places to go, and we're officially a minute over. And so I want to apologize. Thank you so much, everyone, for your great thinking, your wonderful insights this week. It's always wonderful. I see a few words coming up, and as soon as you get your word in there, feel free to go. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.